Good evening, one and all, and welcome back to Bible Break. And we're continuing to follow Jacob on his travels now as he leaves the place of his meeting with God, Bethel, which means the house of God, and continues to wend his way towards his uncle Laban. So we're going to have a look at, we're going to read chapter 29 of Genesis. We'll read the first 30 verses because that seems to me to be the natural break there. And then we'll have a think about one or two things afterwards. So Genesis chapter 29, reading from my NIV as usual. Okay, here we go. Then Jacob continued on his journey and came to the land of the eastern peoples. There he saw a well in the field with 3 flocks of sheep lying near it, because the flocks were watered from that well. The stone over the mouth of the well was large. When all the flocks were gathered there, the shepherds would roll the stone away from the well's mouth and water the sheep. Then they would return the stone to its place over the mouth of the well to keep the water cool and fresh and clean. Jacob asked the shepherds, "My brothers, where are you from?" "We're from Haran," they replied. He said to them, "Do you know Laban, Leah's grandson?" "Yes, we know him," they answered. Then Jacob asked them, "Is he well?" "Yes, he is," they said, "and here comes his daughter Rachel with the sheep." "Look," he said, "the sun is still high. It's not time for the flocks to be gathered. Water the sheep and take them back to pasture." "We can't," they replied, "until all the flocks are gathered and the stone has been rolled away from the mouth of the well. Then we will water the sheep." While he was still talking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. When Jacob saw Rachel's daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and Laban's sheep, he went over and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and began to weep aloud. He had told Rachel that he was a relative of her father and a son of Rebekah. So she ran and told her father. As soon as Laban heard the news about Jacob, his sister's son, he hurried to meet him. He embraced him and kissed him and brought him to his home. And there Jacob told him all these things. Then Laban said to him, "You are my own flesh and blood." After Jacob had stayed with him for a whole month, Laban said to him, "Just because you are a relative of mine, should you work for me for nothing? Tell me what your wages should be." Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah had weak eyes, or delicate eyes, is the alternative reading, which is a bit nicer. But Rachel was lovely in form and beautiful. Jacob was in love with Rachel and said, "I'll work for you 7 years in return for your younger daughter, Rachel." Laban said, "It's better to give her to you than to some other man. Stay here with me." So Jacob served 7 years to get Rachel, but they seemed like only a few days to him because of his love for her. Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife. My time is completed, and I want to lie with her." So Laban brought together all the people of the place and gave a feast. But when evening came, he took his daughter Leah and gave her to Jacob, who must have been well oiled for all this to happen. And Jacob lay with her. And Laban gave his servant girl Zilpah to his daughter as her maidservant. When morning came, there was Leah. So Jacob said to Laban, "What is this you've done to me? I served you for Rachel, didn't I? Why have you deceived me?" Well, you may have gathered straight away that why have you deceived me? That's a question that's a bit rich coming from the lips of Jacob. But that is a point, of course, to which we must return in due course. Laban replied, "It's not our custom here to give the younger daughter in marriage before the older one. Finish out this daughter's bridal week, then we will give you the younger one also, in return for another 7 years of work." Well, this is either something that they've cooked up between them, or it's just Laban's idea, or they're not being very nice to Leah. I mean, you work it all out for yourself. We'll work it out together in a minute. And Jacob did so. He finished out the week with Leah, and then Laban gave him his daughter Rachel to be his wife. Laban gave his servant girl Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as her maidservant. Jacob lay with Rachel also, and he loved Rachel more than Leah. And he worked for Laban another 7 years. As I've just indicated, I don't think anything's really working out to anyone's or everyone's satisfaction in that arrangement. But it's an interesting chapter, because I suppose basically there's one very encouraging point which I believe it highlights, or thing that it highlights. Well, there's two encouraging things that it highlights, but it's just that one is, happy, positive, if you like, and the other involves the scenario that we saw in the second half of the chapter with Jacob and Laban's family. So let's start with the upbeat start, because we are starting on a pretty upbeat note. Already the context, as I've already reminded you, was Jacob's own personal meeting with the God of his fathers. That God was no longer part of the family tradition, but God was now personally Jacob's God. And he moves on from Bethel on that understanding, with that relationship that we have to bear and we have to keep in mind. No doubt he does. Because you get the impression with Jacob in reading this early part of the chapter that he is of the same positive frame of mind as Isaac's, or Abram's servant to Isaac, was when he set out in search of a wife for Isaac. In that he believes that God is going with him, and that he can look to God, and that he can expect from God, and that he can call upon God, and he can look to others and call upon others. And this is what happens. No sooner is he down the road, as it were, than he's meeting these people at the well, and he doesn't need any encouragement to start asking questions, and to ask a question directly about Laban. In other words, he's expecting good things from God. And yes, lo and behold, these people know Laban. And not only that, here's Laban's daughter, who herself is a shepherdess. These people were shepherds. Laban's daughter is a shepherdess, Rachel. And so no sooner they informed Jacob of that, then he goes to water Laban's flock and to kiss his cousin, who it's obvious, the impression is already forming, as it were, within him, that she could be a lot more than his cousin. And she runs off to tell her father because she's so happy about this meeting. So there we have it. The moral as such to be drawn, I think, from all this is that we can expect things from God, good things from God, which will fall across our path. And we don't have to go hunting and searching. But just as Isaac's servant, Abram's servant, didn't have to try too hard, Jacob doesn't have to try too hard as he pursues his course with God to come across his uncle's people and even his cousin Rachel. Sometimes it's like that. God is well disposed towards us in any event, and sometimes he will just fulfill our hopes, our dreams, and our expectations just like that. It falls across our path. However, there is another way which God blesses us, which perhaps is unexpected and even unwanted, because this is the harder part of our relationship with God and of walking with God. Sometimes the hard and difficult lessons which he teaches us. Now, what am I talking about here? Well, to sum it up in a phrase, Jacob meets his match, because Rachel's father, Laban, is as wily a character as Jacob ever was. He's the sort of bloke, Laban, who will welcome you with open arms, but even whilst he is welcoming you with open arms and slapping you on the back, he is thinking about what he himself stands to gain from you being with him. So his great welcome and his hospitality. Don't be too fooled by all that, because you are going to pay for it, and that is certainly the case with Jacob. It's Laban who says to Jacob, "Look, it's not just because you're my relative and you're staying with me now and you're helping me and you're working for me. It's not because of all that, that you're going to work for nothing. Tell me what I should pay you. Tell me what I should give you in exchange for this work that you're doing for me." And it seems without skipping a beat, Jacob says, "Well, I want your daughter's hand in marriage. He says, I want to lie with her in the chapter. Rachel. I want Rachel, your youngest daughter." "Great," says Laban. And so Jacob has to work for 7 years, as it were. That's the sort of dowry, if you like. It seems he works for Laban for 7 years to earn Rachel's hand in marriage. And then, the wedding night arrives. Laban's laying it all on, throwing a great big party. How welcoming and hospitable and how overjoyed and all the rest of it can you be? But then he gets Jacob so well tanked up, while he himself stays perfectly sober, it seems. Certainly sober enough to execute his sneaky, tricky little plan, which is that he will introduce Leah. What a way to treat Leah for a start. But anyway, he will introduce Leah to Jacob. So perhaps she herself was complaining that her younger sister was being married off before her. I don't know all the ins and outs. But anyway, Jacob wasn't expecting Leah. Jacob was expecting Rachel. And so when he wakes up with a hangover, perhaps, the perils of drunkenness, once again, the next morning, lo and behold, there's Leah. And we read those words, didn't we? He says to Laban, "Well, why did you deceive me in giving me Leah instead of Rachel?" And again, without skipping a beat on his part, quite coldly and quite calmly, Laban says to Jacob, "Well, you do realize, don't you? I mean, Jacob, I'm sorry, you're going to have to learn to play by the rules here, because you do realize, don't you, that in these parts, we don't give the youngest daughter before the elder daughter." "Well, you could have told me that before I worked for you for 7 years." But yeah, that's what Laban coldly, calmly announces to Jacob. He doesn't have to wait another 7 years, actually, for Rachel. Rachel, after a week or so with Leah, which doesn't appear to me to be particularly complimentary, but after a week or so with Leah, he is within his rights now, apparently, and he chooses to marry Rachel as well. And there you have it. But the condition is that he must work another 7 years to pay off, as it were, her dowry. If dowry is the correct word, you get the idea. That's what we're talking about. Well, the long and the short of it, of course, is that here Jacob is getting a taste of his own medicine and learning a hard lesson about the way he has treated other people, notably his father and his brother. What the Indians in their tradition call karma. In the Bible, it's an aspect of God's justice, that the wrong that you have done others might well be visited upon you. And certainly it's Jacob now who must swallow the bitter pill of someone else's deceit and learn the lesson, I suppose, of what he is like and of what he has done and of how his behavior has affected others. And no doubt we've all been in a similar situation, and there's something that that we can all draw from this, as well as the more upbeat lesson about expecting God to want to bless us and want to do us good as we do walk with him and as we are in line with his will. So there we are, part of God's discipline there. He's met his match. And I leave you with that, and see you next time around.